Hello, I'm Charles and I'm a beekeeper that loves old beekeeping equipment. Today I'm going to give a class on hive maintenance. Typically I give these as an autumn class, but I decided to put this together now because a local group asked me to talk about hive maintenance. Who am I? My name is Charles DeBarber and I'm known as the Beaky Geek on YouTube to maybe my 3 fans out there. On top of it, I'm a local swarm chaser, catch about 20, 30 swarms a year here. On top of it, I'm really into early industrial beekeeping, collect beekeeping antiques, and as a gentleman adventurer, I go out and try to rescue many of these antiques from destruction. The objectives of this class are really to talk about hive maintenance, which comes down to so many factors. One, why we're doing it. We're going to talk about proper construction, how that affects it, the preservation of equipment. We're going to talk about the rotation cycle of equipment. And we're also going to talk about common failures with many of the key components of a hive. On top of it, we're going to talk about a bit about the Filbert Street Gardens story and its origins and how it actually relates to equipment and maintenance. Now, a quick bit on safety. We're going to be using power tools for a lot of this maintenance, and you really need to be careful and understand each tool you're using. On top of it, safety glasses and hearing protection are your friend. And I just got to stress, don't hurt yourself. None of this equipment is worth you hurting yourself. A great question to ask yourself is, why are we even doing this? Well, Grasshopper, it's because bee equipment costs money. And the better that we construct it, that we preserve it, that we maintain it, the longer it's going to last us. It can add up quickly right now. Like a deep box with frames is easily 50 bucks. Um, these prices are just for pine alone, let alone the more expensive woods. Once again, it adds up very quickly. Now, there are a few things that can help you in this maintenance journey. One is a drill, one's a jigsaw. Circular saws are great for really straight cuts. Um, Wood glue, I would argue, is one of your best friends, but make sure to use exterior wood glue. And a circular saw is really the best saw to use for a straight cut with a hive. But, they can be a little dangerous, they can be expensive, and they can take up a lot of space. So a lot of folks just don't have one. Not only do many people have a bad maintenance issue, but they have a bad storage issue, which storage is really going to affect the life cycle of your equipment. Here, there is a stack of thousands of dollars of bee equipment. In fact, there's a lot blocked by the bushes you can't see in this picture. There is somewhere in the realm of 200 hives that are over there. This was left out for just 2 seasons and it went to complete garbage. And now it's been sitting there and the guy wants it off his land, but none of the equipment is any good. It's all rotten. You can actually see in the top left, somebody donated a hive that they had in a barn, and it had an old yellow jacket nest in it. Wrong insects for that kind of box. I was able to bring that one back to a luster with some patching and care. But I just thought that was really cool to see a box that had a whole different insect in it. Now, with proper storage and proper maintenance, what are we really trying to deter here? That's rot. Um, Rotten holes in boxes don't really impede bees. A little bit of rotten holes here and there aren't a big deal. In fact, they can be fun during summertime, especially on honey boxes, because they can provide a little bit better ventilation, alternate entrances. However, during nectar dearth, they can be quite the opposite. They can now be a second entrance for bees to rob out a weaker hive. So they're not great for weak hives. They're really bad for winter. You really don't want them uh, keeping moisture in the hive because rotten wood just absorbs moisture and you want to keep the inside of hives nice and dry. And I would argue the big one is a little bit of rot becomes a lot of rot later. What you do not impede right now will become a worse problem. Like you see, there's a little bit of rotten wood right there, and I ripped as much of the rotten wood off as possible. And if I just leave that in the rain without any paint or any cover or without patching uh, what I took out, it's just going to keep rotting. I would argue fine hive maintenance begins with proper hive construction. I believe the old proverb is the prevention is much better than the cure. Uh, and this starts in the beginning, I would say, with fasteners. These lead to a lot of problems. Often hive equipment comes with these nails. Don't use those. Like, you should probably use screws, specifically deck screws. Deck screws are great because they're outdoor. They're essentially made for what we're doing, and I can undo a screw. So that makes it a little bit easier to do maintenance on the hives later, especially if I have to patch something. On top of it, a screw is a lot less likely to come out because in time, the nails that most hives come with fail. Um, if you really are dead set on using a nail, use one of the spiral ones. You're never going to pull that out, I can assure you. On top of it, exterior wood glue is your friend. Make sure you use exterior. You can also, with a little bit of sawdust, mix up some great wood filler to try to patch clumsy patching work. On top of it, metal shelf rails are really awesome. We've gotten away from it in modern equipment. You can buy them online and put them in. They really deter rot along the rails, which is, I would say, arguably the toughest thing to do repairs for if you're not a woodworker. Patching that wall along where frames were, that sucks. And these metal rails, they really deter the rot. They really protect the frames themselves because the frames now aren't propolis to propolis to other wood, leading to tearing as you pull them out. I would argue it puts a lot less stress on the hive. On top of it, for honey boxes, you can buy these 9-frame shelves that'll perfectly space out 9 frames. We just don't really see them in equipment much anymore, but you can buy them online, and I encourage people to do these. Now, with proper instruction, just as important, your frames. In fact, your frames, often the boxes will outlast the frames, and good constructed frames last a heck of a lot longer. Um, it starts with proper fasteners. There really aren't spiral nails in that size, so use round-headed nails versus those 10-penny nails that barely have a head on them. On top of it, always use wood glue. Please always use wood glue. I've seen both ends of it where people only used fasteners, and those came apart within just a couple of years. And I've seen the reverse, which is even worse, where they only use wood glue, and literally the next season they were just coming apart. Um, I would argue your best option is always a staple and nail gun. The staples are a little bit better, but nails from a nail gun are great too. Now, one trick I want to point out that will really elongate the life of a frame is, you see the picture right there? If you can put a fastener right under that sidebar into the top rail of the hive, or the top bar of the frame, that makes a big difference. A lot of the time, and we'll talk about failures in a little bit, a lot of the time you'll be prying a frame up and it's held there by propolis or whatever, and that joint will come apart there. If you put a fastener right there, that joint will no longer fail on you. I have seen the end of the frame break off before that joint failed. That's how helpful that is. And I can't stress this enough. Bare wood hives are going to rot, even if they're treated wood. You'll only get a few seasons out of them if you don't preserve them with something. Frankly, I just throw outdoor latex paint on them. But there are water-based stains that'll work. There are clear coats that you can put in there. There are people that will take beeswax and cut it down with olive oil and then just rub that on the whole exterior of the hive. You got to do something. I would argue paint is often your best option because you can see when it's failing. Um, but that's just me. On top of it, and this is going to cause a little bit of a riot in the room. There are currently no studies or there's no data showing that painting the interior of a box is bad. I say paint them. I've never heard a compelling argument that was backed with any quantitative or qualitative data for this. In fact, I have seen in ABC XYZ of beekeeping in the early 1890s where they're telling people to not paint the inside of boxes. Um, doesn't really deter the bees, really. I don't see them chewing the paint off. If there was any real reason for it, it seems that that reason may be gone now. Maybe it was because of the oil-based paints back then or the lead-based paints. I can just tell you that it's become anecdotal and it's entered the realm of essentially an old wives' tale. Now, equipment needs to always be in what I call the rotation cycle. Boxes are rotated out of the hive. During your honey harvest, that's a great time to pull boxes that you don't need. You'll pull them, harvest the honey, and then just do a quick assessment. Does this one need to go in the pile to be painted because the paint's coming off? Is there a little rot on this box to where I need to do some repairs? Is there warping? Autumn and spring box rotation is also a great time to pull these. During those times of year, we're often rotating the brood, um, excuse me, the brood chamber down to the bottom of the hive. So that bottom piece, where there's currently no resources or anything significant, that's a good time to pull that and evaluate, does it need paint? Does it need maintenance? On top of it, your autumn consolidation is a great time as well, where let's say you have two boxes with 5 frames that have resources and the rest just are blank or don't have any resources. Well, consolidate the uglier looking box out of that. And in time, you can just have all your pieces rotate out and kind of take a break. Now we'll discuss some common failures with the common hive components. Now, hive boxes have 3 common types of failures. Edge rot, which is most common on the bottom of the box. It can occasionally happen along the top. When it happens on the bottom, it's often the back, most likely, because this means that they don't have their hive tilted forward just a little bit, allowing for proper drainage. Rainwater will just rain down the front of the box and then leak into the back, and there'll often be standing water in the hive. That's a big deal. You don't want that. That's bad for your bees, but it's also very bad for your equipment. It can also be very damaging to your bottom board. This does occasionally happen in the front too. When I see it happen in the front, I often see that it could have been deterred by painting the um, the rails along the bottom. Like a lot of people don't paint where the box to box or box to inner cover connections are. You really should paint those too. Next, we have wall warping. You can see with this one that literally it looks like it's being squished down and the box is bowing. This is very common with unpainted or untreated hives. I see a lot of naturalist beekeepers having this problem and um, then trying to add some fasteners to fix the bowing and then breaking the wood. Um, ask, ask me how I know. I've seen that. Um, it's also a good indication of poor storage. Meaning one, it's probably stored somewhere a little bit too moist. And two, with the front and back, if those are bowing in, that could have probably been prevented a little bit by keeping frames in there. And then finally, there's fastener failure. The nails begin to come out of the box, and the box just isn't square anymore. In fact, I like to lay a lot of boxes on their face and see if I can wiggle them. If they wiggle too much, like, yeah, the fasteners are failing there. Knock new fasteners in. So this one's best fixed with new fasteners. Um, and it's best fixed with using great ones to begin with, like screws. So how do we fix edge rot, which we talked about in the last slide? Well, we do that by hive patching. Hive patching is when you cut the rotten piece of wood off or where the rot stops and you put a new piece of wood in its place. It's really that simple. And the most common is bottom patching because as we said, that is where boxes most often fail as far as rot. Um, you want to glue these in, you want to attach them with some sort of fastener. And it's bonus points if you use outdoor wood filler between the old and new wood to kind of fill those gaps. The bees will fill those in with propolis in time, but you don't want to make any little nooks that hive beetles can hide in. On top of it, top patching is possible. The edge on a frame shelf, that's the most complicated part of the cut that takes a little bit more skill with woodworking. I have fixed that wall. I have sometimes even just cut the little bit of rotten part out and let there be a second entrance and painted as well as I could to just slow it down. That's worked for me too. I would say avoid this though with wood filler. Wherever boxes touch in a box to box connection or a box to bottom board connection, do not put wood filler directly there. You can literally rip the whole patch out because they're going to propolis those boxes together. And often that is stronger than, than wood filler. Wood filler is also not great to pry apart on the edge of a hive because in its best of days, it's going to be a little bit squishy. Now, should you have a table saw, hive trimming is a great option too. Let's say you have a deep box and it has rot along the bottom. You don't want to patch it, or it's multiple places on the box, or it goes pretty deep and it would be a pretty big patch. Well, you're in luck. You could literally cut a deep box down to a medium or a medium into a shallow. And most top feeders, you can buy the inserts for the top feeder, and those are just 3 inches to 3.5 inches. Saves wood, saves equipment. Um, I have had rot in deep boxes before and found I needed more mediums. So you know what? Why not just cut that box down? But I do got to tell you this, table saws, they really are the most dangerous tool in your workshop. They're responsible for about 30,000 injuries each year. Be careful, learn how to properly use one, follow all the safety procedures. Once again, this is not worth hurting yourself over. Now, the most irritating thing to break in a hive is always the frames, because it always happens at the most inopportune time. It happens as you're in there working the hive and an end snaps off or a joint comes loose. It sucks. Sometimes you can push the joint back in. Sometimes you can still get the frame out even if the end broke off. Um, you have a few options for this though. The first question you really should ask yourself though is this: should I even be doing this? Does that frame have any resources on it that I want to preserve right now? This spring I had one break off that it had a lot of brood on that frame, so I wasn't pulling it. I used one of those beautiful repair kits that you see on the top right there. And that frame will leave and be rotated out as the brood chamber moves upward. So it's really just a temporary fix. Um, I have had the joints come out, and you can sometimes once again push the joints back together, but it's really not going to help you pry it out of the box, and that's temporary at best. I have on occasion repaired a frame inside the hive. That means hammering a couple new fasteners into there to get it to work. And I got to tell you, the bees don't like it when you knock on their house with a hammer. If you're going to do it, you got to do it quickly and move. You're often best trying to find another way to pry that frame out of the box and doing it outside of the hive. But sometimes you don't have much of a choice, especially when things are really propolised in there. Now, the most common failures on these boxes are the end snapping off and then the joints coming out. Those two joints specifically uh, in the picture on the bottom. Um, New fasteners. When you go to do repairs to the hive, uh, that's a great thing to try to repair or at least look for. I've also had it to where, I'll be pulling boxes apart and a bottom rail just rips right off that was propolis there. That could be in part because maybe I tolerated burr comb for too long. Um, and it just puts a lot of stress on those joints. Um, Frames are just so prone to failure in part because they undertake a lot of trauma. You got to think every time we pull a frame out and put back in, it's propolised in. It is literally glued there with the resin that the bees make. And then we're pulling it up every time and unseating it. And, in time, those joints are just going to fail. Um, when changing out the foundation, I often just pop a new nail in there anyway. That new fastener will kind of keep the joint honest. And once again, follow the initial construction tips on building these right and using glue and using the right fasteners and use that trick for the top bar. It'll make a big difference. You'll have your frames last a lot longer. Now, outer covers, they typically fail in two ways. The most common one is just along the rim, you get wood rot. I've also seen it pretty commonly where the fasteners in the corner come out because a lot of the time they're just nails. Um, Really, just keeping a fresh coat of paint, being careful with how you pry up your equipment. Um, you can often pry the rotten boards out because you got to think under that telescoping metal cover there, you have four boards and usually a piece of plywood that they're nailed into. If you're very careful, and you can use even a Hive Tools pry in for this, you can pry the old rotten boards out, cut new ones, knock them down there with the original fasteners, and you're good. I've done this repair plenty of times. You can see in the far right a good example of that repair. Now, I have a number of inner covers in my yard. I have the newer ones and then the old ones that didn't fail. It's a common piece to fail in a hive. As you can see, the four corners, they often can come out of their joint. A new fastener can often fix that and elongate its life. On top of it, the veneer that is on the wood or faux wood that they use on the inside of a lot of these, that could peel right off. That can be related to moisture and other problems. One way to actually prevent that is to just use inner covers with notches. I don't even know why they make them without them. They are great for drainage, for when the hive is tilted forward and condensation in winter builds up on the inner cover and outer cover. On top of it, they allow for better airflow and ventilation in a hive where air can come in the entrance and go out the top and keep things dry, keep things happy. Um, so I would put a notch in there if you don't have one. A Dremel is a really good tool for that. You and if you didn't even have that, you could probably use a chisel to make one. But I would recommend having one. I can say that I have a number of old ones which have stood the test of time uh, because they were just well constructed. Now, out of my pieces of equipment in my BR, the ones that tend to last the longest are the bottom boards. Bottom boards, they take a lot of abuse, but they're built really with pretty ingenious construction a lot of the time. Most bottom boards, especially the classic ones that are closed bottom, they are built with tongue and groove slats. And then the rails on the side have multiple fasteners. It, and they're put together with great wood glue. Um, like the joints on them are pretty solid. Now, I find a lot of the problems that I have with a closed bottom or the rails. They're a little bit more prone to rot along the bottoms of them. Uh, they're very prone to rot if you put them on the ground, which we'll discuss in a moment. Screen bottom boards, they're the most prone to rot, and they're very prone to failure in the back corners. Um, Without those tongue and groove pieces for the solid bottom board, it doesn't allow it to be as square as a solid bottom board with a solid bottom is. These are very durable too, but I've seen these don't have the long lives that closed bottom ones do. And I just got to stress, don't put your hives right on the ground. Wood to soil connection is very bad. It will make the equipment rot very quickly. Even just put it on a pallet or a couple of bricks, man. Just don't put it right on the ground. Uh, that will just lead to rot and so many problems. Now, it's not a hive component, but it is very important to maintain your smoker a little bit. You'll find that the smoke eventually just gums up the end of your smoker. Open it and look and see how narrow the mouth gets with it. I would just make sure that you clean it every season with a screwdriver. Just scrape it clean. And you'll find that the most sensitive parts of these are the bellows. They don't even really make them with real wood panels most of the time these days. They make them with this faux wood. That faux wood does not like getting wet. I've had quite a few of these smokers to where it was left out in the rain because they didn't want to put it in the shed, because they didn't want to burn the shed down. They just wanted it to be outside to cool. The wood would end up swelling and the bellows were destroyed. You can often order plastic bellows online, which solves this problem. But once again, it's the bellows is where these things often fail. Now I'll leave you with a few final thoughts here. Winter, that is your ideal season for hive maintenance. You don't got much going on during that time of year. Um, that's where you get to that pile of bee equipment that you need to repaint or patch some rod or cut some deeps down to mediums. It's the best time for assembling new equipment. Do not put it off till spring because that'll bite you. Spring is your busiest time as a beekeeper. On top of it, storage is a big deal. And, not just because of the exposure to elements. Wax moths will ruin a lot more than just your foundation and comb in there. Your comb, it really is your gold. It's more important than the honey, frankly, because it's such a expensive resource calories-wise. But wax moths will also just damage the integrity of the hive. You can see in the top right picture, they just scarred the inner part of this box and they scarred the frames. This hurts treated wood quite a bit. And especially if you had bare wood there, it's now prone to just suck in moisture. It's more prone to rot now. So this is something that needs either repainted or resealed in some way. On top of it, a way to get around a lot of these issues with wax moths and rot are to use plastic components. They do have greater longevity, but if something breaks on them, they cannot be repaired. Like if you have one of the little hooks on the side or the fasteners snap off, well, you just don't have a fastener there anymore. They can be a little prone to warping, but that tends to be the older plastics. The newer plastic hives, they're not as prone to warping as they once were. Uh, we had a real big push toward plastic in the late 80s and throughout the 90s. And those components, there's not too many of them around because they warped. However, like these new ones, one of the drawbacks, however, can be, those hive systems are expensive. Another cool perk of these is, you can wash these out with dish soap and water when you rotate them out. They're a lot easier to care for. Now, a little bit about Filbert Street Garden and my story, and well, our story at the garden. I started as the beekeeper over there back about 8 years ago. That's when I first got into bees in 2015. and I looked for a place to keep more hives because my wife and I agreed to just 2 hives on the property. I called a bunch of community gardens. Many did not return my messages. A couple hung up on me, very upset, saying things like, I'm allergic to bees, and felt offended I even asked. But I called Filbert Street Garden, and the manager there, Miss Rodette, was so incredibly sweet and said, oh, heck yeah, bring them down. And she gave me a great place in the back. And I set up there, and you can see in the top right, those are the first nuke boxes that I set up there. They were splits off of my hive back at the house, along with another swarm that I caught. We had no money to do anything, though, in that bee yard. So I wanted to have that bee yard, didn't have the money for it. What did I do? I called a lot of bee clubs in the area, and I said, hey, what are you guys throwing out? And I patched a lot of this equipment. I got it functional again, or at the very least, even if it was in rough shape, it bought me a couple of seasons so I could replace it. I also watched a lot of Craigslist sales, and I don't mean to be rude saying this. There are a lot of widow sales out there where beekeepers pass away and their spouse wants to get rid of everything. I bought a big lot of that. In fact, I got about 8 hives worth of equipment out of that, as well as an extractor and some equipment. Um, like I really appreciate that first sale because we couldn't afford to buy anything else. Um, you can see we haven't bought bees there in about 7 years. Like we bought some for the first season I was there, but not beyond that. Everything else has been a split, a swarm, or a cutout. In the bottom right are the Bolton Hill bees in Baltimore. They were in a park on a branch that broke off about 30 feet off the ground, and they broke and they were in the elbow of that branch. The city of Baltimore was initially going to spray them, so I came out at night. I cut up the tree, and I cut up where the hive was and had 2 logs that were just all honey. And we threw them in the back of my truck, brought them to the garden, and I did a cutout for them. And that hive now, 4 years later, is still alive and thriving. And you can see in the bottom middle there, we have close to 35 hives. We're the largest bee yard in Baltimore City. Um, Even with that quantity of hives there, we get plenty of honey. I'm very proud of it. And we also have a lot of tenant beekeepers who are people that just can't keep bees at their apartment building or wherever they're living. Uh, you can see that it organically led to us having a bee club, which is the top right there where we mentor new beekeepers in the city. Um, and honey is our one cash crop there. We produce about 100 gallons of honey a year. And that's really about 12 grand worth of honey. Um, that's the one thing we sell. Everything else in the garden, from the produce we grow, to our curbside pantry, to the parties we have, to the free movie nights, to more or less acting as a private park for the public, all of that is free. It doesn't cost a dime for the community. Our goats are very popular too. I can only brag about them enough. Also, 2/3 of our animals there are rescues. A lot of abandoned livestock. So I leave this open for questions since we're on YouTube here. Feel free to throw them down in the comments. But this is a slide I put together of just some great bad ideas. Um, some of these are things that I have in my collection. Like in the top right, I have one of those smokers, and the center is a pump smoker. They were very short-lived in the late 1800s. You would have a smoker boy like pumping it because it's a 2-hand smoker, so you can't work a hive and use it. But one, it makes such a racket. Um, and you're doing this movement of pumping that really agitates bees, so it's very counter. We also have one of my favorite advertisements in the AI root catalog on the far right, the Stimple swarming ladder. Somebody probably killed themselves on that thing if they ever used it. That's a dangerous ladder. Um, which a big part of my swarm class is don't kill yourself going for the bees. One that I was introduced to this year, one of my beekeepers in the Beekeeping Antiques group, they showed a Sears hive from the 1950s that's made of metal. It's a metal hive. Now I knew that they made aluminum foundation. Um, that became popular in the late 40s and early 50s, um, simply because plastics weren't around yet. But a metal hive, especially in the American South, that's going to kill those bees. That's going to cook them. And that's why it's short-lived. That's why they don't make them out of metal anymore. But to see one, I think that's such a neat little treasure. And in the bottom right there, we also have, it's not beekeeping, but a great way to transport your goat. So I appreciate you listening to me here and me yammer on for the last 35 minutes. Once again, if you have any questions, please submit them and please like and subscribe.